At 18, I had already begun the next chapter of my life, college. I had always believed my parents when they said they'd make sure I didn't have to worry about paying for it. I would focus on my studies, and my college fund would cover everything. It had worked that way for my brother, so why wouldn't it work the same for me? But as I settled in, I realized something wasn't right. Tyler, my older brother, had it all. Sure, I wasn't the type to compare myself to him constantly, but it was impossible not to notice. Everything seemed to go his way. He didn't even have to try hard. He was always treated differently than me. I never understood it, but it was there, clear as day. And it wasn't just in the little things, his behavior, his actions, the way he lived. It was like no matter how much trouble he caused, there were never any consequences. I remember one time he brought a beer to school just to make a scene. He said it was a dare, but I knew better. He loved pushing people's buttons. And yet, when he got into trouble, a suspension, sure, but nothing that really made him face the music. He got off easy, and everyone, including my parents, just laughed it off. Meanwhile, I couldn't even think about doing something similar without facing punishment. My parents would have grounded me for weeks, maybe longer. There was a constant, unfair comparison. I was held to a higher standard, and I could never escape that feeling of being treated differently. I tried talking to them about it, but every time I did, they brushed it off as nothing more than jealousy. For years, I kept my head down, focusing on college, trying not to let their favoritism bother me. I realized they weren't going to change, so I learned to live with it. But then, something happened that shook me to my core. Something that went too far. A few months ago, Tyler graduated from college and made a huge, impulsive decision. He bought a luxury sports car at 21 with no job and no money. He didn't even wait until he had his degree in hand. He took out a loan, using my dad's credit card, and purchased the car, knowing full well he didn't have a plan to pay for it. I was in college when he called the family on a video chat to proudly show off his new ride. I thought my parents would be furious. After all, he hadn't even graduated yet, and he was making a ridiculous financial decision. But they weren't angry. They were proud of him, congratulating him on his purchase like it was a great achievement. I couldn't believe it. It was irresponsible, and frankly, it didn't make any sense. But it was my dad's card, and I felt like I couldn't say much. So I just congratulated him, keeping my frustration to myself. My brother was fine for a couple of months, making payments when he got a job working for my uncle. But as expected, it didn't last. Tyler missed a payment. Not just any payment, a crucial one. The third installment. I saw this coming from a mile away. My parents didn't want to admit it, but the situation was inevitable. A few days ago, they called me, their voices tense and filled with worry. They explained the situation, and I tried my best not to say I told you so. I wasn't going to rub it in, but deep down, I knew this would happen. But as the conversation went on, it got worse. Much worse. They said they were going to pay off his car payment, using my college fund. The money that was supposed to be for me, the money they had promised would be there for my education, was now going to clear his mess. My money, my future, was going to be drained just to help him out of his mistake. The worst part? They didn't even think to ask me first. They just decided it. No warning, no discussion, just a simple call in the dead of night. I was livid. How could they do this? After everything, after all the times they had promised me that my college fund was safe, now they were using it for my brother's reckless decision. They said they didn't want to ruin my dad's credit, but that didn't matter to me. It was my future, my dreams, that they were sacrificing. I was going to have to find a job, they said, just in case they needed more money to finish paying it off. How could they not see how unfair this was? How could they throw my future away for a mistake that wasn't mine to begin with? They expected me to just accept it. But no! I made it clear this wasn't happening. I wasn't going to stand by while my entire future was upended because of my brother's mess. They had to find another way. It felt like a weight had descended on me, heavy and suffocating. I had to make them understand. I tried explaining that they could simply surrender the car, save me from this unnecessary conflict, but no, they wouldn't budge. They insisted that it was my brother's first car, and for sentimental reasons, they couldn't let it go. But what about me? What about my future, my education? They had no problem sacrificing that. How was it so easy for them to dismiss my future for something as trivial as a car? If they had been upfront with me, if they had told me from the start that I would have to shoulder the cost of my college tuition, I would have understood. It wouldn't have been a problem. But no, they'd set expectations, and now they were shattering them. It was beyond frustrating. I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I knew deep down arguing was pointless. They had already made up their minds. They weren't going to listen. So, in that moment, I did what I had to do. I hung up and prepared for what I knew would come next. If this is what it took, then so be it. Without hesitation, I picked up the phone again, but this time, it wasn't them I was calling. I reached out to my grandparents. They were my safe haven, the ones who had always had my back. They understood the struggles I'd faced with my parents, and they never judged me. Sure, I'd thought about living with them before, really considered it, but I never did. They were getting older, and I didn't want to add any more burden to their lives. I knew they'd welcome me with open arms if I asked, but something in me held back. I couldn't do that to them, not after everything they'd already done. Still, when it came to big decisions, when my parents' choices left me trapped, my grandparents were the ones I could count on. The college tuition wasn't something I could handle on my own, and I needed their help. It was complicated to ask, and it weighed heavily on me. When my parents first told me about the college fund they'd set aside for me, I felt grateful. But now, the situation had changed, and I had no choice but to ask my grandparents for help. It wasn't easy. I was distressed, on the verge of tears, when I called them. And when they answered, I just poured everything out, the frustration, the helplessness, all of it. I told them how badly I didn't want to be a financial burden, how much I hated asking, but how I had no other option. My grandfather's response was immediate and fierce. He was pissed. He didn't hesitate. He told me I didn't have to worry about any of this, that I could go back to college, stress-free. They were going to take care of everything. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. He reassured me that if my parents couldn't cover the tuition, they would. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to relax. I blocked my parents' number without hesitation. They had put me in an impossible position, and I wasn't going to forgive them for that. The next couple of days were a blur of comfort at my grandparents' house, but as Sunday evening came around, I knew it was time to return to college. The drive was easy, just an hour between my grandparents' house and the campus, but when I got back, things took an unexpected turn. My phone was flooded with calls from my uncle. That in itself was strange. My uncle and I weren't particularly close, and I certainly didn't expect him to be reaching out like this. At first, I ignored him. I thought it was just more drama from my parents. But as the messages kept coming, curiosity got the best of me. I answered one of his calls, unsure of what I was about to hear. He was irritable, annoyed, and blunt. "You need to unblock your parents," he said, sounding exasperated. "They're losing it, and they want to talk to you." My uncle explained that my parents had been hounding him, begging him to convince me to speak with them. I was taken aback. What more could they possibly want from me? Eventually, I gave in and called them back. The moment they picked up, the verbal assault began. They immediately accused me of ruining their lives. They said I had turned my grandparents against them, and for what? They claimed I was trying to get revenge for something as trivial as jealousy over my brother's car. The accusations hit me like a slap to the face. What were they even talking about? My grandparents had only promised to help me with my tuition. How could that turn into something so ugly? It was clear that the situation had affected them more than I realized. Apparently, my grandparents had reached out to them after I left, telling them they were using their inheritance to cover my college expenses. I never expected them to get involved like that. But in a way, it felt justified. They had messed up, and now they had to face the consequences of their actions. And I couldn't help but feel that this was the only fair outcome. When I first heard my parents' justification, it felt like a slap in the face. They claimed that their money was their own, and that the college fund they'd promised me was merely something they'd hoped would cover my education. But now, with an emergency on their hands, they believed it was better to use that money elsewhere. It stung. But then, it was clear to me that they were treating me the way they treated their own parents. I didn't see anything wrong with it, but they were furious enough to accuse me of everything under the sun, blaming me for all that had happened without a single thought to the fact that maybe, just maybe, this was all their fault. I wasn't surprised. They practically screamed at me over the phone, placing blame on me as if I'd orchestrated everything on purpose. It wasn't my intention, but at this point, I wasn't going to back down from the consequences. And so, I did something I'd never thought I would. I told them they deserved everything that was happening to them, and with those words hanging in the air, I hung up. I blocked them. I was done. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to prove. After that call, they couldn't reach me. They tried to reach out, but I made sure they couldn't. I shut them out completely. But then, the bombshell dropped, a post appeared on social media, a public attempt to turn the blame on me. They painted me as the villain, twisting everything in their favor. I found out through some of the family who hadn't completely abandoned me, people who still had my back, but what came next shocked me. Some people were taking my parents' side. They actually had the nerve to say I should be more understanding. Some went as far as to call me entitled. Entitled? I couldn't believe it. I thought about it for a while, and still, it didn't make sense. My parents had promised me for years that they would cover my college expenses. I never thought that asking for what had been promised to me was unreasonable. If they'd never made that promise, fine, I'd be on my own, working through college, no complaints. But they said it, they made that promise. I wasn't demanding something that wasn't mine. Then, there was my brother. I couldn't understand the sympathy people were throwing his way. He was the one who had made a terrible decision, buying a car he couldn't afford, with no plan to pay for it. But no one seemed to be as upset with him. Why should I feel sorry for him? I'm just trying to make my way through college, trying to secure a future, and maybe one day buy a car like that, only when I've earned it. That should be something people respect, not something to feel sorry for. But somehow, people were seeing things differently. I couldn't grasp it. It confused me, frustrated me. And to make matters worse, the comments from my family members kept coming, reinforcing everything I feared. They had sided with my parents, only seeing one side of the story, my parents' side, and it was clear they didn't know what I had been through. They didn't know how it felt to trust someone, to rely on their word, and to be let down. They didn't know how it felt to have your future sold off without a second thought. But I wasn't going to let their judgments shake me. I blocked them all out, even the ones who thought they knew better, and my grandparents, despite their efforts to soften the blow, couldn't protect me from the reality. The hurt lingered, but I knew I had done what was right. My grandparents, they understood. They knew the situation, and they stood by me. I even had a conversation with them about what to do next, and they reassured me. They were going to try to get that post taken down, and I decided not to interfere anymore. There was nothing left for me to do except to let them handle it. I was tired of dealing with it all. I just wanted to move on. I had blocked out the negative noise in my head. After all, those people, my relatives, didn't know the full story. They only heard my parents' version. They didn't understand what had happened, didn't know how my parents had broken their promise to me. And now, as I read the responses to my original post, I felt a strange sense of relief. Some people were on my side, and that meant the world to me. But the ones who still called me entitled, after all I had said, after all the context I'd given, well, they could think whatever they wanted. I knew the truth, and that was enough for me. It didn't matter if they twisted my words, made me out to be the bad guy. I stood by my actions, my decisions. I had done what was right for me, and nothing could change that. Fast forward a week, and I learned that my parents' post had finally been taken down. It wasn't because they had realized they were wrong, though. No. My grandparents, alongside some of my other relatives, had stepped in. They reached out, offering support and ensuring I wasn't alone in this. They had spoken to my parents, urging them to take the post down before the damage was done. I'll admit it, it felt like a small victory. But it wasn't over. I had made the mistake of checking the post through a fake account. I knew I shouldn't have, but my curiosity got the best of me. Seeing the comments, hearing people call me jealous of my brother, hearing them side with my parents, it hurt. Deeply. It cut through me like a knife, but I had to remind myself that these were the same people who hadn't really known me, not in the way I needed them to. They were siding with my parents, not knowing the full story, not understanding the depths of what I'd gone through. Still, thanks to my grandparents, the post was finally taken down. It wasn't easy, but they managed to convince my parents to pull it. How? By telling them that the longer it stayed up, the more they'd lose. They'd lose not just face, but their inheritance. It was disgusting, really. The greed, the manipulation. And it worked. The post was gone, but the damage wasn't completely erased. At the end of the day, my parents never reached out to apologize. They never even tried. They knew they were in the wrong, but they couldn't admit it. They refused to take responsibility, and that was the hardest pill to swallow. They wanted me to feel like I was the villain, that I was the one who had ruined everything. But I hadn't. They had. And I would never forget that. So, as I move forward, I'm not letting it define me anymore. I'm standing firm, knowing I did what was right for me. And that's all that matters. I thought, maybe, just maybe, I could still salvage something, a fragment of the connection I once had. But now, I'm left feeling disillusioned, disappointed. Why did I even bother? Why did I unblock them, give them a chance to apologize? The truth is, I should have known better. They've never once acknowledged how deeply they hurt me, how they never really cared. From the start, it was clear, they don't care about me. I was just holding on to a sliver of hope, hoping one day they'd wake up, see my worth, and accept me as part of their family. But that moment? It never came. I realize now that it's never going to happen. I've always tried to be the good daughter, the good sister, the one who put effort into keeping the bond alive. I wanted them to see me, to value me. But now? It feels like that dream was always just that, a dream. And maybe others might call me foolish, accuse me of being naive for holding out hope. But how can I help it? These people are supposed to be my family. And yet, the years of emotional neglect weigh on me. It's like an ache that never goes away. I can't explain why I'm opening up about it now, why I feel the need to say it out loud. But it feels like if I don't, I'll keep carrying this burden. Maybe, just maybe, saying it all out loud will help me find some semblance of peace. I do feel bad, I won't lie about that. But I'm also relieved. The post is gone. It's over. And I know the truth now. They don't care about me. They never have, and they never will. It's harsh, but it's the reality I have to live with. So, I think I'm done. For my own sanity, for my own peace of mind, I need to block them again. No more letting them have access to me, no more letting them control the narrative. I can't let them keep hurting me. It's time to shut that door for good. They are my family, not really, and I can't pretend they are anymore. The only family I need now? My grandparents. The ones who have always been there for me, who have shown me the love I was so desperately missing. I want to take a moment to thank you all. For reading my posts. For sticking by me. For the support that has meant the world to me. Your words remind me that I'm not alone. That there are people out there who understand, who see me. And that gives me strength, more than you know. Update 3, hey, everyone. It's been almost 6 months since I last shared an update, and honestly, I can't believe how far I've come. Back then, I was in such a bad place, mentally, emotionally. But now? I'm in a better place, and it feels like I'm finally starting to find myself again. Therapy has been a big part of that. It's helped me cope with the reality that my parents and I will never be able to heal. That things between us will never go back to how they were. I had to come to terms with the fact that I don't have the parents I always wished for. And it hurts so much, but I'm learning to live with it. Now, when I go home from college, it's not to the place that once felt like home. It's my grandparents' house. And at first, that was tough. Really tough. But after cutting ties with my parents and brother and starting therapy, it's getting easier. Thanksgiving came around, and I spent it at my grandparents' house, where I'm actually wanted, where I feel loved. And I was so relieved to hear that the people who've had my back have also cut ties with my parents. No one seems worse off for it. So, no, I'm not turning anyone against them. It's just the reality of things. The family is divided now. Some are still on my parents' side, some on mine. It's a strange, awkward situation, but I didn't start it. They did. Here's the kicker though, my grandparents have already made their decision. They've cut ties, and they've changed their will. The inheritance? It's coming to me. It's not going to them. They don't know it yet, and my grandparents haven't told them. And you know what? I'm glad it's this way. I want to make sure that if my parents ever try to come back into my life, it's because they genuinely want to apologize, not because they want something from me. I think that's fair. I can't tell you how grateful I am for my grandparents, for their love and support. They've given me the family I've always deserved. And while I may never return to the family I once had, I've come to terms with that. Because the truth is, that family wasn't right for me. But now, I have the family I need, the family that cares. And for that, I will always be thankful.